Going to say you're going to break it down, or I'm going to say you break it down?
You're going to say it right now.
Okay.
Go ahead and say it.
Hi, this is Cork Graham, and I am at the Break It Down show.
Yes. Yeah. All right. We come in a rolling start. Hey, Graham, thanks for coming on the show, man. I cannot wait to have this conversation, and I have a feeling that this is going to be a multi-parter. We'll probably have to have you come back because you've done so many incredible and impossible things.
Not impossible.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they're possible because you did them. Let's first direct everybody to your website, corkgraham.com. That's where you can get Cork. And you can already begin like holy cow, look at this guy. He's incredible. By the way, he comes from us via Tim Abel, who was a former veteran turned actor who's been on the show a couple times. And we've had a couple of guests on, including D.W. Wilbur. And in general, hey, everybody, listen, YouTube, if you're watching on Facebook, that's fantastic. Keep doing that. YouTube is my preferred place. So at least subscribe over there. And then maybe if you're so inclined, go over to breakitdownshow.com and click on the PayPal link and then put a couple of dollars in the pocket each month. Like, would you buy me a sandwich? Hey, great. Just throw the $15 into the pot each month and I'll put that money to work on the show. We're going to be getting out on the road. We actually just yesterday officially worked on the elements to go to Tennessee. So we're going to be driving around Tennessee in September, getting some shows, John and I. So this is what this money goes towards. It gets us out of the house. It helps the show grow, helps me to buy ads. And that is a great way to support us. You can, of course, also buy shirts. And if you go to the Bonfire site or the website in general, breakitdownshow.com, you can get the Spy shirt if you want. And there's plenty of other ones. The Soundwave shirt is really cool. The classic Break It Down Show shirt is cool. So that's how you support the show. Liking, subscribing, all of those things. Cork, let's talk to you, man. You live in Alaska. You've done. I do. You know what? Give us your short bio, just so everybody understands, just like your background and how incredible it is.
I was born in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I am Hispanic in regards to my mother being from the Andes of Ecuador around Quito. And my father is a American born in Chicago and raised in Spokane. Ended up becoming a Marine during Korea in between college because he didn't want to get drafted and go in the Army. And so in the same way that he said that the Marine Corps had been his father, the Marine Corps basically became my father, where I had a Navy regulation haircut right on the verge of Marine option haircut all through childhood on up. I was raised as an expat overseas in Southeast Asia. My first memories of life are the Tet Offensive of 1968 in Saigon. We lived there for 4 years. And then when Nixon was pulling out troops in 72, we also left. And then my dad, who was a sales engineer in the radio communications industry, ended up going and becoming the director for Asia South Pacific, Asia Pacific Rim for Kohler International, and based it out of Singapore. So out of Singapore, we did a lot of traveling. It gave me an ability to pick up a variety of languages. My first language was ironically Spanish, because by the time I was born, my mother had not been able to speak English fluently. By the time my brother was born, so his first language was actually English. And it's interesting. Taught me a lot about accents and ability to speak variety, to basically be a polyglot, and how when you get the brain synapses as a child, you're able to manipulate your tongue and mouth to pronounce various words and vowels and alphabets that you don't get in all languages. And being able to do that's like Spanish translates into Russian, Russian translates into Korean. It's a wild experience doing that, being able to travel and be able to get in with the locals, with the natives in the country. So when we got back to the States, when I was in high school, as we share the background in Northern California, I graduated from high school in the Bay Area. And then from there, I went to Berkeley. I was a midshipman. I was a Navy midshipman. And about the end of my first semester, I went to my commanding officer, who was a submarine lieutenant. And I said, "Sir, I'd like to take a leave of absence. I'd like to take an LOA." I said, "Sure, the Navy will still be here." Actually, by that time, I'd gone Marine option. I was planning on being a pilot for the Marine Corps, flying at that time was the new F-18. And I had this compulsion to go back to the land of my childhood, not specifically Vietnam, but at that time, that's about the time that Colonel Bo Greitz was going in after the MIAs in Laos. There was the fighting in between the Khmer Rouge and the Vietnamese on the Thai border, or near the Thai border. And I just had this compulsion to go and follow a kind of like a memory of my father coming in about, was it 70? I think it was 71 when he disappeared. But Sean Flynn and Dana Stone disappeared at the Cambodian border. And I remember vividly my dad coming in and telling my mother, hey, you know, the son of your matinee idol, because she had a fascination with Errol Flynn, he just disappeared up at the border. And that was only 25 miles, you know, away from Saigon at the time. And it stuck in my mind. And I had this fascination, like, you know, I've become friends with Joe Galloway, you know, from We Were Soldiers. I know a lot of combat photographers and journalists, and Nick Hood, you know, he took the famous Napalm Girl. He's a friend of mine down in LA. We're still, he retired from AP. And I ended up straining for AP when I got to Thailand. And that's what I wanted off to do when I told the lieutenant. I said I wanted to go off and be a combat photographer. And I went over to Thailand, and I started covering the MI situation. I did a covert insertion with the Hmong Hill tribe people into Laos. That turned out badly. First time I'd seen dead people or people dying. And got back from that. And then there was a guy who was meeting my mentor, John Everingham, who was an Australian photographer that I found out about because Michael Landon had just made a movie that came out as I was at SFO. And I remember the pink section in the Chronicle when they had that. I
do. I also remember the Oakland Tribune Peach, their afternoon paper.
Yeah. So in the pink section of the Chronicle, they had a layout promoting the new TV movie with Michael Landon and somebody who was like an Indonesian porn star playing John Everingham's wife, Kao, you know, where he swum under the Mekong River 3 times with an octopus rig and got her out on the 3rd time, you know, with the Pathet Lao throwing grenades over the side. And it's interesting how these circles play around, because then I ended up being contacted by someone else who had also read that story in Reader's Digest that John had written, that Landon turned into the movie. And by the way, the name of the movie is called Love is Forever, if anybody wants to go and watch it. It's kind of a sappy Cold War type of movie, you know, which is funny the way it was set up when you actually meet the real people. But Richard Knight was a British actor turned treasure hunter. And he was needing a photographer to cover his expedition. So I said, hey, I'm up for it. And we snuck into Vietnam and by the Cambodian border. And we were taken prisoner, and I was held for 11 months, accused of spying for the CIA. I was 18 years old at the time. And I said, hey, I was in college trying the best I could to not let them know there was actually still a Navy midshipman, 4th class. And try to remember where my reserve card was, you know, and that's interesting. I found out they don't issue, from what I heard, they don't issue the reserve card anymore to midshipmen or officer candidates. Back then, they gave us a standard, you know, red Navy reserve card, ID card, and I had that card, and I used it so I could get into the PX in different places, you know, of the world. Right. As long as I had a high and tight, I could get in, no problem, no questions asked. And but I was worried at that time because did I leave it back in Bangkok, or did I have it on my things when I was on that boat that we used to sneak in to Vietnam? And that ended up becoming my international bestseller, The Bamboo Chest, in 2004, and that led to me being on the Discovery Channel new hit series for 2015 as the team leader, Treasure Quest Snake Island. And but there are other things that happened between then. I was a combat photographer, and then I saw what was really happening in Central America. I had a friend from back in Thailand who was a contractor for the agency. I didn't find out completely or confirm until my father's death back in 2012 that he actually was a contractor for the CIA back in Vietnam when he was working there for SIGINT. He was doing helping them with signal intelligence, basically setting up their agents with bugs and, you know, listening devices. So when they went in on an operation, but so I ended up becoming a paramilitary officer, working in pseudo operations in Central America. That's what my next book's going to be about.
Let's pause right there because you've already covered a lot of ground. And you've done a lot of stuff. So so obviously because you're raised as an expat, you don't mind being overseas and doing things that are, probably, I would guess you probably are less comfortable in the States at this point. And where did you graduate high school in? Where were you at in
Carmont High School in Belmont. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Which is a totally different Belmont from now. That place has gotten so gentrified. I mean, it was a nice, pleasant place to live. You could afford to live there. Now you have to be making about $500,000 just to live in a small studio.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You're not buying a house for less than $1 million over there. Yeah. But, so were you more comfortable overseas than you were, say, at Berkeley or wherever?
I was, mainly because of I had a yearning. That's the thing about being raised expat, where you have no real memories other than vacations, coming back to visit family in Spokane or down in Santa Maria, in California.
Right.
And but there's this yearning because at that time, I don't see it now, which is very interesting. We could talk sometime, if you want to, about this New World Order change and reset in terms of like how people's attitudes have changed so much. Where when I went to the Singapore American School, there was a very solid American red, white, and blue patriotism there, and it was to the United States. I've listened to students who've graduated from the Singapore American School now. In those days, in these days now, what's happening is it's more of like, oh, well, we're all together, and it's this kumbaya and everything. While we have some real threats in this country, and people, it's amazing to think that, oh, well, if we embrace them, they're suddenly going to be our friends instead of they're reaching for a knife to stick us in the back. And they have done repeatedly. And it's not being paranoid. Like Nixon says, there is a time when you're not paranoid in America. There's somebody trying to get you, and you better respond in the appropriate manner, right? But that's the thing that I've seen change in education systems.
Let me jump in there and talk about some of these things a little bit, because when you are abroad and you do see how other countries live, it is curious that being an American patriot is such a non-universal thing. We have this diversity, and people come here from another country. There's a lot of folks from India that live here, and they can be damned proud of being Indian and wave the flag and root for the soccer team and all these other things, and make well over six figures here. And not want to go back to India other than for vacations because it's way better here, and yet be anti-American.
Exactly. And that's new.
This is a curious thing, right? Yeah. Like if you come here from Mexico and you root for Mexican boxers and you root for the Mexican football team, God, all right, that's cool. But don't be anti-American on top of it, because we've given you the created this place where anybody can create their own opportunity. And so we have this thing where somehow patriotism and being proud of where you're from is somehow a bad thing. Now, look, we have our flaws, but when you look around the world, and this is why I bring this up to you, because you raised as an expat, you speak several languages, you've lived in a lot of places. We got it pretty good here. Are we perfect?
Yeah.
Hell no. No one is, though. No one is. As much as we want to idealize the Nordic states, there's problems there too. So talk a little bit about what it looks like when you actually live in another place, like a place like, come on, Vietnam. I bet a lot of Vietnam is really hard to even survive, let alone, thrive or live like you live on the peninsula of the California Bay up in San Francisco.
Well, what I've noticed in the times that I went back, because I had to do the epilogue for Bamboo Chest, I had to go and see what was it like. What was it like when I was in prison in Vietnam, and it was basically a Stalinist type of event where what's happening now with the vaccination passports, they're talking about the idea you can't even travel. That's freaking the bejeebies out of me, because even here I am with my interrogators who have the highest security clearances for the whole country, working for the Department of Interior. And that's funny. The Department of Interior is not the Department of Interior like it is here. There, it's a totally different. It's the KGB, the Vietnamese KGB. Yeah. And when we're being transported, from West Vietnam to from Rakia to Saigon, we had to go through checkpoints. Every place you had to go through checkpoints and show your ID, and so they're controlling you. That'd be like going from San Francisco to San Jose, and there'd be a checkpoint in between. And are you supposed to be in San Jose? Are you supposed to be in San Francisco? Can you imagine that happening here? Because it's happened in other countries. But here, we're getting set up for that. And it's under the camouflage, it's under the quote propaganda of it's for your health, it's for your safety. It's like disarmament in all these countries.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Russia. You look at what was it like before the Bolsheviks took over. People don't realize they were just as heavily armed as we are. Everybody had guns in Russia, but the Bolsheviks were able to get them to start turning in their guns out of the safety, the public safety of the Russian people, knowing that by the time they disarmed everybody, nobody could respond in a manner that would be appropriate to that we actually are supposed to have defined in our Constitution. And just being armed doesn't mean anything. You have to have the intention, you have to have the psychology, and that sadly has been wiped out in this country by the education system of that part of like, do you really want to cross that line? And I keep on I get this from combat veterans coming from Iraq, and my response to them is, you're willing to go off and shoot people and kill people in another country, but you won't come and do where you really have to fight for your country in this country? This is where it matters. In the end, it really doesn't matter except for corporations overseas. Think about what it takes to transfer over someone into a country. This is one of the issues of the Chinese actually. My biggest concern right here in Alaska is whether there's going to be a bunch of Russians coming across the water or there's going to be a bunch of Chinese coming across the water. How many people do we have here who are armed? But more importantly, how many people are willing to pick up those weapons and actually shoot them at a human being who's invading your country? And that question has not been answered fully in this generation within this 100 years yet. We're going to see the last 100 years it was answered, but a lot of those people got killed. A lot of Americans were sent over, and I think I was talking with a friend of mine about what is it like with sending all our troops over to Syria and all this kind of stuff. Is that because they're trying to send our alpha males out there? Send our alpha males out so you don't have to worry about them being here and taking care of what the Constitution defines. Enemies, foreign and domestic. And people are not defining it, in the manner that people actually would ask questions. What does it mean to have a foreign enemy? What does it mean to have a domestic enemy? And these questions are not being asked because we don't get these questions. My father, when I was in college, when I first went into college, I went to him and said, "Hey, Dad, should I take this class on philosophy or should I take this class on critical thinking?" And he was aghast. My dad graduated high school in 47, right? He was aghast because when he graduated high school, they already had critical thinking. They were setting up people to think critically so that they could be American citizens and decisively vote because they knew and understood the importance of voting. In our country right now, we've changed so much. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of like generational. We have patriotism just pounded into us. And that's a good thing. And people say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be doing that because then you're just programming them." But as I say in my book, it's like if you don't have your own essence and understanding of who you are personally, someone else will define that for you. And that's whether you're going to be a winner or you're going to be a loser.
I'm curious, when you think about, we do a lot of assigning of people, like when we judge, we assign like, Cork is white. And you're like, actually,
it's natural. Yeah.
Raised abroad. I'm Hispanic by heritage as well. And all these things, but that, we can assign you and dismiss you because we assume that you have a political, and we do this to everybody. Where are you from? Like, where are you? If you grow up as an expat, are you from America? Or are you from Vietnam? Are you from South America? Where are you from, man?
I'm an American. And that's the thing about it. To state that you're an American, I'll give you an example of my mother. My mother was so proud that she did learn English and that she was actually resistant. She didn't want to become an American citizen. She was proud to be an Ecuadorian until finally my dad says, it would make so much more sense if you would be an American. And when she actually looked at it and really looked at what was happening, she not only went into the idea of becoming an American, but everything about being an American, which is, what is the Constitution written in? It was written in English. And I speak all these languages. I have an affinity for globals, for people from different nations. And yet, when it comes down to it, it's the question, what are you going to defend? Because there's a point where you actually do have to defend something. You have to stand for something. And for me, it means standing as an American. I'm not an Ecuadorian. I'm not Vietnamese. I'm not Singaporean. I'm an American. And I'll always be an American because of what being an American is represented to me is because of what the Constitution defines who we are as an American and as Americans. And yet We see it being chipped away. We see it being, quote, reinterpreted. I'm blown away about what I heard last night on the news when it's like amendments are not solid. And I go, well, they change all the time. And I'm going, yes, they can be changed, but not in the manner that you're talking about, like willy-nilly. And that's it's amazing. Yeah, a full process. Yeah, and it's being jumped over. Yeah.
And if we adhere to it, it means we have to all agree that this is something we want to change. And we've done that a number of times throughout our history. And again, we have problems, and I don't want to get too far down the political path, but I like asking these questions from people who have experienced the world as a whole, because we often say, the 1%. Oh, the 1%. And I'm like, scope the camera back, bro.
Yeah.
Now look at the world and who's in the 1%. We all are, we
exactly.
And I know you'll echo this. We poop into potable water. And then flush toilet, never think about it again. The water disappears, the waste disappears, and our life moves on in an instant. That is not the norm around the world. You can go to a doctor, you can get tacos 24/7, all of these things. This isn't the norm. Even in Europe. Europe is so great at going on vacation. There's plenty of days when you didn't provision. Sorry, everybody's done the next day and a half. You're not gonna be able to go out. You better have had food or whatever it is. That's in Europe. I mean, come on. So when you look at these things and you understand just what is here, how important it is to protect it, if we start just willy-nilly changing things, I mean, I'm all for progress. There's things that we need to continue to improve, but let's work on the problems that we agree that we can work on, and then work on getting along in the other spots. Because if we don't get along and we marginalize people even more than we already do, you get people that do have guns. They do band together and they're like, well, I mean, give me liberty or give me death is not just something that you say. It's someone's like, all right, if you're going to step on me and not allow me to be me, and I've moved away from you and you still coming after me, now we're going to fight. And that's something I don't want us to go down, but we have to stop being so shitty towards one another. Like to say that you're a Caucasian is so limited knowledge. I mean, if you went to the Caucasus region of Eurasia and you said, I'm from here.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's a total. Well, think about this. Is the idea that I look at the attitudes we have, a division about racism. That's a luxury. That's a luxury. In other countries, they're not thinking about racism. It's like I wrote about in my books. In Asia, everybody's like, so it's Buddhism and all this kind of so accepting. I'm going, you have not experienced it. And I use an example. So take a Lao, take a Khmer, take a Thai, take a Viet, and put them in a room and put a machete right there in the middle of the room. Come back, everyone will be dead. And they'll kill each other out of racism, out of ethnic differences. And you compare that with what we have now, that people can talk and communicate. But what I'm concerned about is how it's being used right now. It's the same way that the Bolsheviks created that class separation back in Russia to make it look like, hey, just one person who he has one house and you have two houses, or you have two houses and he has one house. That's enough. That was enough to create division so that the Bolsheviks could come in and then start dictating to everybody. In the same way that we have right now, which is, because you're a color, not realizing here it is a class system that's being set up. And the American people are going to suffer from it, but they're using racism in order to divide us to create this scenario of antagonism, because it's the traditional old story of division and divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. We've done it. We did it. We did it in other countries. That's how you fight war. You get your enemies to divide up. I mean, sometime we can talk about, especially after my book's out, about pseudo operations. You do pseudo operations so that the enemy starts questioning who is their buddy.
Right.
Because if you're dressing up as guerrillas and you're going and hunting and fighting guerrillas and you're using the same tactics as the guerrillas, they're going, wait a minute, is this the government troops or are these our own? What's happening here? And that's what the communists are doing in this country right now. They're attacking us flat out using racism. Yeah.
During the BLM riots, and I'm specifically saying riots. I'm not talking about protests. During the BLM riots, there were bricks on the street. I don't know. Maybe that was pre-construction setting up. Maybe it was, people trying to allow for escalation to happen. We don't know, right? And then on January 6th, we haven't taken time to really figure out what happened. We just jumped to conclusions, and we need to deal with these problems because people are feeling they're feeling rejected. They're feeling disenfranchised. You have to have a shot record visible to go do things more and more, right? but you don't need a license to vote in a lot of places, which is, I look, I want everybody, I'm gonna say this out loud. I want everybody to be able to vote who can vote legally. I want that to
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah.
I want to let felons vote in most cases, because I think it's important that they still have a voice.
Mhm.
I also want to make sure that we have integrity in our voting. And there has to be a balance there. It's just not just we need more votes. We don't need more votes. We need educated voters, people who participate in the process, people who want to be part of the government. And I'm going to give you an example of this, right? If you just think about voting and you're like, vote, 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 vote. And when you get your jury card and you're like, no, God, I've got to go on jury. No, 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 no. That's part of your right. That's part of being a great American. You have the honor of sitting on a jury and judging your peer, as opposed to having a Politburo or some other agency do that. It is as wonderful as voting is the ability to sit there and look at your fellow citizen and go, guilty or not guilty. It is an honor to be able to do that. It's a
Yeah.
right. And it's so important. It's way more important than voting, because someone's life is on the line. You're trying to decide yes, no, and tell the judge, not the judge deciding, but you are telling the judge guilty or not
Yeah.
guilty. But we don't. We look at that and we fight for voting, voting, voting. Anybody in the United States who's a citizen here can go to their government at the smallest level to the highest level and find ways to volunteer, to participate, to be part of, anything. But we don't. We just talk about voting. We have to do so much more to care for our government. I want to get off that stuff though, and I want to get back to some of the adventure, sexy stuff.
Mhm.
Did you say Vietnamese prison?
Yes, 11 months in a Vietnamese prison. Listed as POWMIA by the JCRC at the Pentagon. Joint Casualty Resolution Centers, where the military tries to resolve cases of those who are missing in action, going all the way back to World War I. They still bring out bones and DNA. In my situation, the Vietnamese lied for 3 months, telling my family and the State Department that they didn't have me, and saying that I'd probably died in the voyage from Thailand over, and they didn't have me. And then suddenly they released a number of Thai fishermen that they captured, because there is piracy, and the piracy, there's the Thai pirates at that time, of course, which is a sad story, where Vietnamese refugees who were escaping from Vietnam were preyed upon by these Thai pirates, who were often Thai fishermen who found out they could make a lot more money by waylaying boats, Vietnamese fishing boats leaving Vietnam laden with refugees coming out. And that's the thing about the refugees, is that they knew, and a lot of them were at the very beginning were Chinese Vietnamese, which were considered, talk about racism. So Chinese in Vietnam are considered second-class citizens, right? So they were the ones that were most hit upon by the new government when the North Vietnamese took over South Vietnam. And they did take over South Vietnam. I want to continue to reiterate, they did not join North and South Vietnam. They invaded and they took over South Vietnam. North Vietnam was allowed to be communist. South Vietnam had decided to be free. And in the end, in 75, and this is one of the things I want to remind people, is that Biden was one of the people who voted in Congress to not assist South Vietnam. So basically throwing all the work, all the American blood through all those many years in the Vietnam War, voted to just let it float, when all it could have been done is just send a little bit of military assistance, and we didn't have to send any troops, just send what they asked for, which was ammunition and weapons, and everything would have been taken care of, and you still had a free Vietnam. Instead, we had all these refugees coming out. They're running with whatever gold that they could have gotten, and that's the thing. They came out with gold. The Thai pirates knew that, and they actively targeted the Vietnamese refugee boats coming out. The Vietnamese government, on the other hand, whenever Thai fishermen happened to be fishing in the area, they would go and grab those boats and throw those Thai fishermen in prison and hold them as hostages for a ransom. And so Thai families had to put together money. They would send it over, and then these Thai fishermen got out. Well, Thai fishermen were held at the same re-education prison that I was held at, confirmed that we were there. 3 months later, investigators from the JCRC, or POWMI division of the Pentagon, confirmed that we were there. And then the process of negotiations and trying to get me out. Then a ransom of $10,000 was levied on me, 6,000 pounds on the Brit to get out. And it was debtor's jail. So it didn't matter whether I spent another 2 or 3 or 4 years, it would still be $10,000, right? I mean, we don't have that in this country since the 1800s. But in Vietnam, they still have it. So And my objective, I wasn't spying. I was just covering this guy sneaking in. If it was the United States, I would have been sent out within 2 weeks, like, get out of here, but there it's like, oh, we're going to see what we can do. And those events actually led to more interaction between the communist Vietnamese and the U.S. government, especially during Clinton. And that's when it opened up the doorways for Clinton to come in and open up negotiations where we actually got an embassy back in Vietnam again. But the Vietnam then, in contrast to the Vietnam now, is totally different. I mean, this is the thing about communism. They say, oh, it's for the people. But in the end, the power elite take over. And so you have these high rises in Saigon where the majority of the people can't even live there. And they live in the streets. Supposedly, communism and socialism is supposed to take care of people. It is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, after all, the SRV. And yet you have people living out in the streets in Saigon because they can't afford to even rent a room in a small flat in Saigon. So another description of what it's like when you believe the politics.
Yeah. As soon as you think you've got it figured out. I mean, look, the Greeks laid this stuff out. They're like, this is all part.
This is not new.
This is not new.
Yeah. Rome. Yeah.
The other thing is we were talking about this earlier, and I often say diversity is the antonym for unity, and when you talk about dividing, that's because you're, diverse. So I'm not saying diverse is a bad thing, but it's a balance between unity and diversity. If we all aren't going in the same direction, then we're, and there's a lot of people that have said these things, we all hang together or we all hang together.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out when you divide things. And so when you look at a place like Southeast Asia, and I'm talking mainland Asia, you realize that Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, these are all comparably sized countries, and within them they're highly diverse, and there is diversity to the point of machete attacks and constant murder and power that goes around. This doesn't stop. You don't ever find a balance where everybody's like, I'm cool, this is good, I've got everything I need. That doesn't happen. That's just not real, man.
But there's this perfect, it's what is the idea that's always pushed by the communists and socialists? Utopia. There's always this utopian idea of how things are going to be, not realizing that you've got it so great right now. Just the idea that people are able to go out and riot in the streets, that they're able to even be out there because they got free money. If they had to actually go and work like they do in other countries, you don't have that, except when people's lives are in danger, like in Burma, where it's so bad that you can't make your money. You can't make your living. That's the reason the Burmese are doing that. Not because, oh, well, I feel impinged because of my color. Instead of like, I'm not able to feed my kids. And I've always talked with a bunch of my buddies who have experiences. We all have experiences in counterinsurgency, counterterrorism. What do we see? What are we seeing here in the United States? And we see the point, let's say it's Nicaragua, when Somoza was in power, and you had the earthquakes and the temblors and all that kind of stuff that were happening down there. And then we sent all this money. And all this money went down there, and then the people were like, hey, where's our money? That money was supposed to come to us too. But the junta and Somoza and they took that money, and that's what gave the propaganda to the rebels who had been fighting since the 60s in those hills. They were just basically banditos trying to stay alive, college kids who thought, hey, I'm going to be the next Che Guevara, right? And when they got what they needed, which is like, we are going to be the government that will change this all for you. Like last year, where it's like, we're going to change and fix it. Well, people are still dealing with masks. People got vaccines and they're dealing with masks. That totally blows me away, because again, going back to the critical thinking, vaccine, no mask. That's the reason you get vaccine, right? You're supposed to be non-communicative. Yet you hear these doctors talk and say, things are not acting the way they're supposed to be acting with the vaccines. Things are not acting in terms of society. What I see is societal modification, even more advanced than the stuff that we saw in our public school systems, where they're prepping kids. That's why you've got, 25% of the American population actually thinks that communism and socialism is a good thing. basically ignoring what has happened from 1917 until 1990. And the amount of people who were killed as a result of it. Just go to Ukraine. Think about what happened in Ukraine because of Stalin. What's going to happen in this world right now if, when we look at civilizations and who becomes the next empire, it always moves west, right? So you had China, very advanced, and Emperor Qin created China, the new empire. And then that started to fade, and then it started moving west, and then you got Greece, and you got Rome, and then it started moving west, and then you had Spain, and you had England. And then it moved west, and then it became the United States. And now we're moving west, and we're going into China. Is this year going to be the year that everything just totally flips over, and China is going to solidify by being the Navy? And this, remember, if whoever has the big Navy, whoever has the Navy that can control the seas is the empire. In the same way that first it was Spain, then it became England, and then it became the United States after World War II, and actually during World War II. And the negotiations that were being done during that time in order to basically get resources. And why do countries fight wars? Why do countries seek to have power over other nations? And how smart and crafty are. So let's go back to my fighting in Central America. We won that war. Nobody recognizes that. Nobody even knows about it. Why? Because President Bush Sr. welcomed everybody into the New World Order and tried to downplay that we basically kicked Soviet butt. And we kicked it all over the world, militarily. Fidel Castro says, well, you can do it that way, but we'll play the new game. And the new game is we got a lot of money, and the Chinese have a lot of money. But before we get to China, let's see what Fidel Castro did in South America and Central America. He basically achieved victories politically in every single one of the countries he previously, throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, had supported militarily. Bolivia, Brazil, Venezuela, Chavez, Lula, Josefe, I forget the one from Bolivia, Correa, and my mother's country of Ecuador. That guy, and every one of these guys are thieves. Here we win militarily in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and the FMLN gets voted in because they have the most money and they have the ability to pop in. And people are doing the same thing that they were thinking during the Trump administration, at the end of the Trump administration, which is because of this COVID, somebody's got to pull us out of this, which is totally contrary to what the Constitution is saying. You are the American people. You fix this. Do not let the government get big, because if the government gets big and becomes efficient, it quickly realizes it can be the tyranny that it wants to be. And that's what they're protecting us about.
It's greedy and it's so bad at its job. Yeah. Listen, I mean, if socialism works, so let's just give it the benefit of the doubt. Socialism is a good model. If your government and if the people elected can pull it off, but we got to be honest, we don't elect those kind of people. We elect people who are ideologues. You know, you can pick a side, you can pick a person. We all know that. They're incompetent. They're not, and I'm not saying at everything. I'm just saying if you're able to put policy together that creates a net good, then good, go do that. But if you're trying to push an ideology, then we don't have time for that. Vote those people out. I mean, we don't need term limits. We have power already. Just vote the person out. Take your person, but will we all go, ooh, not my person. My person's precious. I'm glad to vote against my incumbent person. I want someone who's like, I will do a better job than this person. That's the person I want. Yeah. I want the next immigrant to come in and do great things in the world. I mean, I've got so many friends from other countries that come here and like, you guys got it so good here. I cannot. Yeah. I mean, I've got Iraqi guys right now communicating with me almost daily saying, help me get to America. And I'm like, man, I wish I could. I don't know how to get you here any faster than what you could do yourself, but they're desperate to come here. And so while we have problems, this is a place that draws immigrants in because there is opportunity here. If we spent more time focusing on our opportunity, I would suggest that we'll do a lot better. Everybody should get Cork's books on Amazon. And if you're wondering, how do I do that? Well, you can go right here to Break It Down Show and type in that link right there. And you can get any of the books. There's a whole bunch of them. And Cork is continuing to write books. Another thing Cork does, and this is neat, and I want to focus on that. We just talked about all this world policy stuff. Oh, let me ask you one more question.
Here's two, but here's the two. This is my that book right there. This one. Yeah, there we go. So You Want to Be a Reality TV Star. Yeah. This is the one that should concern everybody, because when I tell everybody, they said, "Oh, well, it's just a book about reality TV." Who wants to talk about reality TV? Well, it's about media. And that's why I actually go all the way back to Vietnam when I was a kid. And since I was there at the Tet Offensive, I saw what was happening outside. My father knew what was happening outside. I mean, he had briefings from the embassy all the time. The Tet Offensive was one of the best things that ever happened because we were able to find out who the VC were. We found out who were the people who were in Saigon who had been totally hidden. And it was actually a victory, but the media flipped it over and it ended up becoming the beginning of the end of the Vietnam War. And you'll notice that the media, and that's what I'm so happy to be on your show, is because you're independent. You're actually willing to go and get the information, and you want to talk and actually spread the information in the same way that we have a traditional attitude towards journalism. Is Kimber, what do we see now? I was laughing. It was like NBC or CBS. I was watching, and he says his modality of voice was the description last night about the speech from Biden, and I was like, the modality of voice. Is that? Are we in Russia? Russia?
And listen, I don't want to get political. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I really am independent with these things. But Joe Biden was a guy that the Democrat Party mocked nonstop until the day he became, that nominee. And it's like, all right,
crazy.
Come on. So don't ask me to consider what you're saying serious. And I'm going to give another example. David Muir, during the storms in Texas, was like, they're bringing in lockers for dead bodies. Bodies are going to be everywhere. And it's like, why are you doing that, dude? Stop. Yeah. They're just selling things. And you're right. Yeah. Like when you've seen information operations and you hear the adjectives being layered in and the fear being layered in, there's people doing incredible things all over the place. Report that. That's also news. Yes, we have tragedy and that kind of thing. But if we just focus on look, part of the protocol when you have a disaster going on, that was a disaster in Texas for sure, is you flex in resources. Among those things are reefer trucks for a lot of reasons, because reefer trucks are very useful during disasters. They keep things cold, whether they're bodies or nourishment or whatever. There's a lot of things. We have hospital ships that we couldn't fill during the COVID crisis. And yet we talk about hospital capacity. It's a lot of bullshit that goes into these things. And so we have to understand the reality. That's one of the reasons why I don't mind having conversations with people from either side of an argument, because it's somewhere in there is the truth. And America is all about an argument, and it's all about balance. We're always going to argue. We're always going to fight over what we think is going to happen. That's why we vote in one party over the other party, then another party, and then we go back and forth. And we have many elections so we can balance these things out. If we take that balancing thing out and we keep putting our thumb on the scale, whether it's on the right side or left side, we'll have problems. I'm going to ask you this question, and I want to get your thoughts on this. When we talk about Asia, we often talk about Asians, and then we don't realize that people from Lebanon are Asians, people from Turkey are Asians, people from Oman are Asians. Malaysians have the word Asian in the title. Get rid of this word, Cork. Caucasians. Guess what?
Asia. It doesn't become Europe until west of the Caucasus.
Right. And you can be on the borderline there. Like, is a Georgian European, or is a Georgian an Asian? Well, ask them and they'll tell you, but don't assume it. So when does someone stop becoming an Asian?
That's not an answer that I can give, because it's not a question that I can even ask, other than I do Southeast Asian, or I say someone who's but see, even to say someone's Chinese, you say someone is Chinese, you're really not talking about someone who's Chinese, because China, as it is now, is a conglomerate of a variety of former independent countries. And you see that's why they have an Islamic entity in Asia, which sadly, the Uyghurs, they're being persecuted because they don't fit with the communist dictate. Because remember, that's the way I describe it. It's funny. It's just like I describe Islam more and more when it's being fanaticized. Islam is a political system, but communism is a religion. And people say, what are you doing? It's just no, look at it, because it's like the true believers of communism, they're just as zealous whether they're a Catholic or a Protestant or a Muslim, except it's towards communism. And that's where all their focus is. And they have this belief system where they think that the world will follow in. and I'm going to probably anger a few people because I'll even bring up QAnon. The more you look into QAnon, that's become a religion where people, if you even question anything that pops up from QAnon, they're like, oh, how can you even question that? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And what I notice is it's become more like, for those of us who studied Russian history, check out Operation Trust. Operation Trust was created by the NKVD right after, like in the 1920s in Russia. And it was always talking about how the White Russians were going to come and they were going to come and they were going to kick out the Bolsheviks and they were going to free Russia again and all kind of stuff. And it's almost exactly about QAnon. Oh, Trump's. I read one and somebody sent to me and I'm like,
it's ridiculous.
Hillary has just been hanged at Guantanamo, at Gitmo. She was just hanged for treason. And I go, yeah, I agree. She should be hanged for treason, all right. But I doubt that it happened, and I doubt that Trump was standing there and says it's done. And and that's the way the story was written. And it's like and it's scary. And the reason it's scary is not just the idea that this stuff is being popped around. It's the idea. It's a description of our society now that we have moved so far from what it means to be an American, which is, again, Americans make things happen. They don't rely on a upper being to tell them what to do, i.e. the government. Americans make things happen. You're talking about the division in this country and how we do have identities, but I caution in one thing, and that is there's a big difference now, and nobody even uses that word anymore. When I was a kid, and you probably got it too, melting pot. How often have you heard melting pot? Oh, I'm a Hispanic American. I'm Ecuadorian American. I'm Scots American. I'm German American. There was a time which is I'm an American, origins in Ecuador, origins in Scotland, Germany, Switzerland.
Sure.
But American first. And now it's changed over. When we got these isms of African American and Hispanic American, that's what's created this division. And I think it's by design. It's like, oh, well, you should be proud of your identity. I said, I am proud of my identity. I'm an American. And I'm also proud that my mother's from Ecuador. I'm proud of my family down in Ecuador. I love my family in Ecuador, right? I love my American, but I love my ancestors who came, who were smart enough that my ancestors were willing to leave. And that's the thing about it. So if it was so great in Africa, it was so great in Scotland, why are you not still there? Yeah. I know why our family left. They were getting killed. Yeah. You know, persecution,
real persecution. Yeah. They left that to come here because there was a chance that wasn't going to happen here. I wanted to. So we talked about the big stuff. Let's talk about the local stuff because you have a really cool YouTube channel, and I'm always hooked on it. You cannot make enough content for me. I just love all of it. But 5 Acres and a Moose, kind of a play on a couple of themes. But you record your own. I don't want to call it survival, but your own survival, how you live in Alaska.
Lifestyle.
And you're like, don't tread on me. I'm going to go to Alaska and leave me the hell alone. I'm going to go out and make my own things, kill my own food and do things your way, because in America, you do have the right to do that. Yeah,
and we still have that. And you could do that. I mean, not to confuse it. Back even during communist Russia, you see these trappers who are trapping in Siberia. And that's how they got away too from Moscow. They just said, "I'm done with the politics. I'm moving east." And here I am, moving northwest. From California. But one of the things that concerned me was back during Bush Jr.'s administration, there was a price hike in fuel, and it was just 25 cents. It was 2007, 2008, and I was living in Nob Hill in San Francisco, and the shelves at the local supermarket were empty for 2 weeks because the truckers were not willing to transfer stuff. And that woke me up. I'd already lived in here in Alaska, in this area on the Kenai Peninsula, when I came back from Central America, and I had a bad case of PTS, and I just needed a way to get, a place to get away in the country and just be by myself. And it worked great for that time. Yeah. Here, the situation is the idea that, I mean, we're not totally independent. We do shop at the supermarket. It's 35 minutes to get there. I do. I can go and get gas. I have power. But the thing about it is, if those were all gone, could I thrive? Not just live, not survive, not do this bug out system of like, oh, I'm going to go from neighborhood to neighborhood and see what I can rip off of other people. Yeah. No, what can I, as on my own property, grow, raise, hunt, fish, and then reach out to different areas, communicate with other communities. And that was important. And there is that in Alaska. But I caution people who want to come up to Alaska, and that's actually one of the reasons I created the show 5 Acres and a Moose, is because having been in the reality TV industry, I know the fakery. I am very well acquainted with the kilters over the hill. They live just over the hill, you know. And when I first started seeing it, was just like, here's, you know, Ivan, he's got to go and kill a bear. They're going to starve that winter. I said, oh, so he doesn't have to get in his truck and drive 5 minutes down to McDonald's and go get a freaking Big Mac.
Yeah.
So, but it's the idea that you can actually live. Yeah. Yeah. But I want to show how you can do it. Yeah.
They create these crises. You know, like, oh my God, we got to get this chopper done in 2 weeks. Come on, this thing was always going to get done. You know, we have to paint this thing. By the way, you don't paint something in 12 hours and call it done and drive it somewhere. That's all BS. And if you do it, it's only for the show, because no actual
for the drama.
No actual person who builds choppers or makes a risotto tries to do it in 15 minutes. Like, it's all bullshit. They put that
Hell's Kitchen. I mean, geez. Yeah.
I love the British Baking Show, because they don't do that stuff. They're like, they might do like a tight timeline, like you can't make mistakes, tight timeline, but they also like just want people to bake, and they want good people to talk about, like, oh, I bake cookies for my church cookie contest, and I always come in third. I've never won, but I'm here today. And then now they're making, I don't know, something. So you're right. There's a lot of hocus pocus in the reality TV world. And I always wonder about the Alaska survival guys, because I'm like, you're lashing things together with garbage, and you live in a place where the weather conditions are extreme. You're telling me there's not like a Home Depot store or an Ace or something with brand new. Okay, you're going to use rope. Great. But you have to go pull rope out of the trash.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, and it's like you can't afford to go in and do that, and that's actually concerning, because there are people who come up here, and this actually normally happens during fishing season. It's like, dude, can you loan me freaking the price of a plane ticket? I'll get up to Alaska, I'll sign up on a salmon boat or a longliner, and I'll make the money back by the summer. Well, 9 times out of 10, they get hooked up on the time band into their crab fishing. They blow all their money on booze and drugs. Then they get back and it's like, I can't pay you because I blew it, party. And it's like, sorry about that, but will you do it for me next year? And so you get that kind of culture that comes up here. Then you got the other culture is like, I just bought, I was just talking, I found out I've got an extended family of cousins here, and 2 of them are bush pilots. And one's an A&P, another one's a cop, and we actually had lunch yesterday, because I told you that I had to go and help a friend move his floats, because he just bought a PA-12, and I'm a bush pilot, so I'll probably have, flying his plane with him. And so we went to go get the floats for the PA-12. And so we're talking, and then my cousin says, yeah, there was this couple, they moved up here like 6 years ago, but they made it. And they bought this property sight unseen. They moved up from Florida. And I said, when did they get here? And I'm thinking, well, if you thought ahead of time, you get here in like May, and then maybe get flown in, dropped off with all your supplies that you collected by June. So they got here in September. And I'm like, oh no. And this is a man in white. It's like, it's like they had nothing there. They had lumber. It's like the plane came in, then they brought in the lumber. I'm going, you don't have an Alaska mill. You've got trees all over here. You can't cut those trees and turn them into planks if you want to. You don't know how to make a handcrafted log home. Trapper cabin. Cut him down. Marty Mariotti, the one on Mountain Men. I mean, he's the real deal. And I think that's the reason he quit. He says, I'm done. I'm taking my Piper Cub and I'm out of here. And that was the last time I saw him on the show. But he's come out with his own book about what it's really like to be a trapper in Alaska. But here's this couple, and he says, they made it. They actually survived the 6 years until their health got so bad, because they were in their early 50s when they went to go do this. Which that in itself I found wild. It's tough. It's one of those things. But they were talking about, they found a mound, and so they burrowed into the mound just as snow's coming, and bears were trying to break into their burrow that they'd made to use it as their den. So they created a bear den, and they lived in this bear den through that first winter until they could start building stuff. And then they even borrowed my cousin's cabin and slept in there and lived in there to finish out the winter, which if they did it, they would have died. But that's the worst case scenario. You got people who come up here and say, oh, you can live that dream. And the realtors are like, oh, that's the way to do it. And I caution people, say, first of all, it takes a lot of money to get going up here. And the best thing is if you can actually go and buy somebody's property. it's not as expensive. You know, like I make a comment and say, you know, my property and the view that I have, if it was a Sausalito, would be a $5 million home. Okay. Mm-hmm. I paid below 200.
Yeah.
So that shows the difference.
Right.
But the lifestyle is totally different. I mean, right now we're talking about quote the drama. Well, there is a drama, but you just take care. It's not you're not going to broadcast. Oh, we're going to deal with it. I got to put 2 high tunnels up, and one of them is going to be geothermal. So my little dream is, you know, being raised expat in Southeast Asia, is I'm going to have papayas, avocado, and mango growing in the dead of winter in this high tunnel with no artificial heating, just from the geothermal, because you dig deep enough. They do it in Ontario, which in Ontario and over in there in Quebec, it's a lot worse than it is in this part of Alaska, you know. Even though this was a pretty bad winter this year. It was actually a really bad winter in terms of length.
You're talking about, this goes back to this thing where, like, you, the trapper guy you mentioned earlier, you know, these guys are independent. And what you don't want is, and the reason why you guys go out where you go is because you don't want someone telling you how to live your life. You're like, I want it to be this way. I don't consider this hard. Look, Sausalito has nothing to do with where you live now, because in Sausalito, they got a lot of things provided for you. You know, okay, you bought a houseboat, and that's great. But you also have a lot of protection from a lot of things that just are not available in Alaska. So it's a total different world. And I love that you're out there doing it. And we can do these things. I was in the winter, I was fascinated with Laura Ingalls Wilder. I started reading her books again. Mm-hmm. And again, you know, they got some government help, but they also could look up in the sky and say, oh, there's a blizzard coming. We got to be ready. And they already were mostly ready already, but like, this is going to happen. We've got to get buckled up and survive the storm. Mm-hmm. You know, here come the locusts that just destroy our entire crop for the year. You know, all of these things would happen all the time. If you aren't resilient enough to deal with that, you know, and you don't want that kind of, you want to go live in New York City where those things aren't a problem. You never have to worry about locusts. Then good, do that. But don't tell someone who lives in Wyoming and wants to run a ranch, tell them how to live their life. You know, they don't want to tell you how to live. You shouldn't tell them how to live. And so here you are saying, this is how it works in Alaska. I love this, man. I love that you're like, here's how you put these snowshoes on, you know, just a quick knot. And then you kick your ankle sideways and pull it out. And all that stuff you can get on 5 acres on a moose, and you can see a whole bunch of Cork stuff. I also see that you have a very scary looking gun on the wall behind you.
I have lots. I was actually going to talk about guns that I actually have ready to go. Bear protection. Do you know what round that is right there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's a 4570 right there.
Yeah.
That comes out of a Winchester right here.
Yeah.
So that's old school. That's actually, when this came on the market back in 1886, up here in Alaska, they went crazy for it, because before that they had 30-30s. And the reason is because I have local 1,200-pound brown bears. Everybody talks about the Kodiak brown bear. I said, well, his cousin lives in the neighborhood. And I go out, I check my chickens, because I got chickens and geese. They haven't got a taste for them, thank God, because they really focus on salmon. I've got scratch marks on the back of my truck shell, and I know because my truck shell is 7 feet tall, right? So by that, I can tell if the bear's looking down, he's about 10 foot. So that's about a 1,200-pound bear. But I've never been
scratch
messed
marks.
with.
You're not talking like some kind of kitty scratches. Like these things are ribbing up metal, you know. Yeah.
Just to hold his weight, you know. And then here's another one. It's like people say, well, that's for Africa. It's a 375 Ruger. I mean, look at for my digit right there. That's how long that thing is. Right?
That's the tip of your pinky.
I wish I had so here's a 22. Yeah, I just have this little 22. There's a little 22 right there. 22 long rifle. And then you got bear medicine right there. My buddy Phil Shoemaker. It's interesting because then, you know, here in Alaska, they said, why do you have so many guns? Like right now I'm talking to you, but we have concealed carry. So what for concealed carry? I carry a 1911.
Right.
Here's a 1911. What do I carry in my 1911? I carry, these aren't the ones that normally go for personnel, military, law enforcement. This is a hard cast bullet. Hard cast bullet because it has penetration. My friend Phil Shoemaker, very long time Vietnam veteran, bush pilot. He, by the way, the reason I carry the 1911, see the way my thumb is?
Yeah.
I don't you know how many accidental discharges there have been in training for law enforcement? with the Glock because they jammed it in there and they pulled the trigger accidentally. Yeah, that's the nice thing about that. But
Unholstering terrifies me. I can shoot, and I'm like, I don't need this thing to be. I don't need it to be in the holster because I'm not going to be in a quick draw contest.
Yeah,
you know,
it's and you shouldn't be quick drawing, because if you're quick drawing, that means you're too late. You're not paying attention to what's happening. You're not paying attention. If you're like, oh my God, it's already happened, and you're just trying to recover ground that you lost 2, 3, 4 seconds ago while this predator. And this is the thing about it. It's, you know, knowing our backgrounds and everything, it's the idea that when you are in a threat level and you have to go from, quote, yellow, you know, if you go to the Cooper understanding of colors, you go from yellow and then you go into orange and red. And when you go into that state, that here you're on a homestead, where's your law enforcement? Your law enforcement is 35 minutes away after you've made the call. They'll hopefully get there in time to put you in a bag before you start to warm up. I mean, you know, or cool down, I should say. And that's a big concern, and people are not prepared for that. And I'm not even just talking about Alaska. I'm talking Montana, Idaho, California.
I mean, this is true. Like, if you get a place in the desert, like out in, like, in one of these lightly populated areas, one of the things you're going to have are people that will throw numbers at you. Hey, 6 of us are going to take out that one dude. And I'm not saying this happens all the time, but if you drive through the desert, you'll see a lot of homes that are broken into because you don't live there all the time. Someone's going to come take your stuff, and they're prepared to use force. And you're right. Cops are not coming by that time. It doesn't mean that everybody has to get into gunfights all the time, but you're in a place where the animals can kill you or your pets or your food, you know, and also if someone comes walking up, you don't know what their intention is, because no one should be walking up onto your property with good intentions. Like, they should.
I have a chain. I have a chain across my driveway. For that very reason, which has a sign on it: "Do not enter."
Right.
You know, if you cross that, that means if you're not, because I can hear you. If you want to yell, plus I've got I've set up security. You know, I've got sensors, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the main reason is because there's a plague throughout rural America, and it's called meth. And people don't even talk about that. Name one reality show where they talk about that. And I'll talk about that just because it's something to know about. It's not something to be afraid of or something that makes you just paranoid. It's just the idea of understanding that if people are on meth, they're not working. If they're not working, they still have to go buy meth. And if they're going to go buy meth, they're going to steal it from somebody, in terms of either stealing the drug or they're going to go steal something to go and buy it with. And so that's where most crime in Alaska is coming from. And we have the triangle that goes from Homer to Kenai Soldotna to Anchorage. So stuff will be ripped off in Anchorage, and then it'll be transported over and sold, you know, in either of these other towns, because that's where there's enough money for it to be sold off. And also those are places where you've got these pharmacies. And why meth? Because meth is like one of the perfect things to do on your own and do it in the wilds. Nobody's going to check on you unless somebody actually goes and says, hey, there's a meth lab right there in that cabin off in the woods. Yeah. Well, listen, but you don't get that on the shows.
No, you don't. I've had you for an hour. Everybody should definitely go check out 5 Acres and a Moose on YouTube. Just type in 5 Acres and a Moose and look for Cork Graham. And if not, that'll be in the show notes. If you want to buy the books, that'll, of course, also be in the show notes. You guys definitely should support us by going to the Amazon link. All of Cork's books are available on Amazon. Go there for that. Let's do another 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 more of these things, because it is fascinating as you deal with, like, the world. You've been around the world. You've seen what it's like and how hard it can be in other places and how good we do have it here. Again, we always have problems. We have to deal with those things, but let's work on working together or leaving people alone. Like I always say, Cork, and I think you'll agree with this. There are very few people who can't overcome 95% of their problems in America. You can simply outwork your problems and be so focused, so working so hard that someone else is going to recognize your hard work and say, let me help you. We have help for someone exactly like you. You've invested in yourself. Let's invest. This can happen over 1 million times all over the place. I mean, there's money that goes uncollected, to help people to go do things. So I appreciate you coming on and living this life. Definitely, everybody go check out 5 Acres and a Mule. Anything in closing, Cork?
Well, please do check out the show. I'll be coming out with one every Friday, and that's going to be the full long episodes. I'll be doing instructionals, how-tos, philosophies in terms of what's the psychology and mentality to have if you're going to move just rurally, not specifically Alaska. and what kind of questions you should be asking yourself. Can I do this? Do I really want to do this? There are people who are just fine and happy to live in the city. And I say, more power to you. But if you live in the city, why don't you do what your grandparents probably did if they lived in New York and they maybe just moved in from Italy? Because that's one of the things I think romantically of is people who moved from Sicily, lived in Chicago and New York. And you see documentation of this in movies since about 15 years ago. And that is when you see movies, they're shot on rooftops of apartments and stuff like that in New York and Chicago. Nowadays, there's nothing there. But if you look like from the 70s and 80s and early 90s and earlier, you see these gardens and people are growing their own food, because people forget that the ability to have fresh greens and how important it is to have fresh greens is something that was always taken care of. Now we get it by going to the supermarket. Our grandparents, they got it. And that's why it was called the dry goods store. You went to the store to go get canned goods, noodles, pasta, maybe some bread, but likely you went to the bakery for the bread. You went to the butcher for meat. But the veggies, if you didn't get them in the farmer's market down in the local, you had it growing in your garden. You had your lettuce growing. You had your tomatoes going. And that's something that people really have to start focusing on again, just because of the way things are going. Just from a cost value, but just like back 2007, back in San Francisco, where it's like, whoa, 2 weeks, and I had to go out of town to go shop for food. That was scary.
Yeah. Well, listen, everybody, go check that out. Let me roll this thing. Stand by for a second, Cor. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you